Hi everyone, this video was recorded at the Spring Institute, March 2021. Our guest speaker in this video is Angharad Beckett, Associate Professor of Political Sociology at the University of Leeds.
I called my little think piece Thinking Differently, Being Differently, and I'll share these slides later, but I've put here just Twitter information and who I am in case anybody would like to follow at CDS Leeds at Angharad Beckett. That's just because I love to follow people back as well and know what you're all doing. So it's fantastic to be part of this panel with Nancy, Gregor and Dan, and I'm looking forward very much to meeting and engaging with you all. So Oana and Annika asked me to select some readings for you to consider, and I naughtily didn't follow instructions. I chose three. One that I wrote with my colleague Tom Campbell on the social model as an oppositional device. Another that I wrote again with Tom, but also with another colleague, Paul Bagley, on heterotopias. And that one doesn't have a disability focus, but is around my interest in political sociology. And a third by the art theorist Brian Holmes, whose work has inspired me. And those of you who've read the oppositional device article will know that Tom and I drew quite heavily on some of Brian's thinking there. So last night I reread those three articles and I came to them again after several years, and I think it would be quite interesting to read older things that you've written sometimes, that you haven't entirely forgotten, but you're now able to view them at some distance. And I found myself, I'm pleased to say, quite happy with them still. There's always a risk that you look back and cringe. I can see, though, why I also felt so excited the day that I chanced upon Brian Holmes's article. It was a very fortunate happenstance, thanks to a bit of Googling. And the finding of that and the ideas within it sparked lots of other thoughts in me, and I think are a really good example of the importance and value of reading widely outside perhaps your discipline or even your comfort zone. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is not to give a sort of summary of those three pieces, but rather to use them as a jumping off point instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about what thoughts they prompted in me when I read them again last night. And what I'm going to share is, I suppose, a kind of stream of consciousness, a series of thoughts that came to me as I thought not just about them, but also about this event, its very interdisciplinary character. I thought about all of you as the kind of future leaders in our field. The thoughts I'm going to share are not about the subject matter of those articles, which were about social movements, but rather about contemporary disability studies as a critical and, I would argue, radical field. So instead of repeating the argument that we made about the social model of disability and its importance as an oppositional device, instead what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about how these ideas that we've had in disability studies operate, and argue that we need ideas, we need concepts, and it's a strength of disability studies that we have engaged in not just empirical research, but also conceptual research. And we shouldn't forget that in the face of sometimes an onslaught from the empiricists, who feel that conceptual research is somehow lesser or less important. I think it's actually a real strength of disability studies that we work with theory and we work with concepts. So the overarching theme for what I'm talking about today are two things: creativity and resistance. And I felt like I was, on Sesame Street. Today comes to you from Creativity and Resistance from C&R. And I'd like you to ponder these phrases. One by Deleuze, and this looks extremely egocentric, but one is by me. So the first from Deleuze is to create is to resist. And then I have reframed that as to resist is to invent. And this is really what I want you to think about today, and perhaps we can discuss later in our discussions. It seems to me that a real strength and achievement of disability studies is the creation of concepts and ideas. I wonder what your favourites are. Some of mine are Dan's notion of dis/ability, the notion of the normate, the social model, the affirmative model, ableism, ability studies and how we theorize that. Also the good old classic distinction between impairment and disability. These, I think, are really important tools in our toolkit as people who analyze and think about disability. Why have we felt the need to invent them? Think about these concepts, because I think of a shared belief that we need counter rationalities. We need these ideas so that we can insert them into the existing regimes of truth to aid the political struggle of disabled people. If we identify as disabled people, also to aid our struggle. If we identify as allies becoming or practicing allies, then to aid the struggle of our friends and our comrades. And our ideas in disability studies can at best, when they are effective and operated skillfully, be viewed as, I think, oppositional devices that allow for resistance practices. And there's an artistry here. Ideas, I think, are something between a prop and a performance. They bring people together in a pattern of interaction. I would have thought that ideas are indeed what brought us together today. But the question I want to pose to you, or questions, are not just which are your favourite disability studies concepts, but why do you like them? How do they operate? And what do they allow you to do? So ideas like the social model, yep, the good old social model, much maligned, much misunderstood, I think have served a really useful and important function and operation for us. They've allowed us to develop collective enunciation and articulation of public speech about disability, and to challenge dominant ideas and ways of thinking and speaking about it. And that alternative way of thinking about disability as not being a private trouble, but instead as a public issue, and here I'm indebted to C. Wright Mills, of course, and the sociological imagination, has allowed for resistance and for us in academia to play our part as academic activists or allies as well. Now, I wonder if someone could tell me, because I have no timer on the screen, where I'm at in my timing, please.
4 more minutes left, Angharad. I was just going to give you a 3-minute warning.
Okay, thank you. So ideas like the social model operate as a way of engaging in a form of artistry, I would argue, within disability studies. They bring us together, they're what brought us together today, and they allow us to do certain things. And what do they allow us to do? Well, whether it's the concept of compulsory able-bodiedness, ableism, so many different issues that we work with in our field, they've allowed us to identify things that we think are unjust. They've allowed us to harness and orientate our practices as researchers to challenge these oppressive programs, practices, whatever they may be, to form counter rationalities, other logics, other forms of truth and alternatives to idealized notions of the human, or to deficit model thinking, or whatever it might be. They've allowed us to develop, I think, a framework of agreed values. And I think there's work to do there across disability studies. For example, how we decolonize ourselves so that our ideas can travel better and are not about imposing Western ideas elsewhere. But nevertheless, there are some agreed values that I think unite us as people who work in disability studies. And I think they've allowed us to work strategically and at one. And so really what I wanted to say in this presentation today is to tell you that I think that you are entering or have entered a very important field, that you have joined, if you like, a movement within academia that is a creative force. I think in disability studies, we are a resistant form of life. And had I had my extra 5 minutes, what I was going to talk about was how and why I think that disability studies operates heterotopically. I won't do that now, but perhaps those who are joining with me later, we can actually tease some of that out and think a little bit more about what it means to be a counter space, an alternative space where the social is reordered in important ways, and how we can each contribute to that, and how we can develop those spaces and those modes of attack in order to challenge the various disciplines of which we are a part, create ruptures in the ways that people think within those disciplines, how we can spread out in various ways in ever more directions, creatively and innovatively, how sometimes there will be splits in disability studies, and how those new splits will grow in exciting new directions, and we should welcome that. So I was going to talk about how I think we can think of disability studies as such a field, at best a safe space, but also a potentially dangerous space. And that's fine. We should be able to engage in radical thinking, challenging of each other's, and challenging where we feel that oppression is being replicated elsewhere. So we can look within and we can look without, and we can challenge the order of things. So really, I wanted just to try to explain to you how, as a political sociologist, I engage in disability studies. It's not by leaving behind political sociology, it's by bringing it into our area, making the concepts of political sociology relevant to disability studies, but also thinking about what it is that we are doing as a kind of academic activist collective, if you like. Okay, I will stop there.
Thanks very much for watching. You can like and subscribe to our channel below. We're currently working on a British Academy funded project looking at the lived experience of disabled people during the pandemic. And you can find out what we're up to at tendproject.com or on Twitter at tendproject. Thank you.